Something unprecedented happened today in Westminster that has sent shockwaves across the entire United Kingdom. And it is no exaggeration to say that what you are about to hear could completely change how we view war, the economy, and the future of our sovereignty. Prime Minister Keir Starmer stepped up to the podium with a cold, calculated tone and uttered 6 words that left the entire room in stunned silence. According to those present, even security staff exchanged silent glances. This was not diplomacy. It was a direct threat, an ultimatum. And the target? Vladimir Putin, named personally, without euphemism, without hiding behind Russia or the Kremlin. It was the kind of speech not heard in London for decades, and the impact was immediate. Ministers rushed out, journalists scrambled to file reports, and online the reactions split the nation. Some hailing Starmer as a hero, others as a madman about to light the fuse on a global bomb. But what no one has yet realized is the true reason behind those words, and that is what you will understand now. Starmer did not merely criticize Putin, he redefined the battlefield. According to Westminster analysts, the Prime Minister transformed the war in Ukraine into a mirror of the British soul. "You are not just defending Kiev," he said, "you are defending what it means to be British." That line echoed like thunder over Parliament. Suddenly, a conflict that seemed distant gained a face, a smell, an emotion. He connected every family's dinner table, the high gas bills, the electricity costs, the fear of winter, to the survival of a free Europe. And the Kremlin got the message instantly. Hours later, Moscow responded with icy tones. A spokesperson declared that London has crossed the red line of prudence. In other words, the UK has officially entered Putin's list of direct enemies. But what the press is not saying is that this rhetoric is just the tip of something much larger. Something that has been prepared for weeks inside 10 Downing Street. A plan blending geopolitics, morality, and survival. And, according to sources, it was all carefully rehearsed for one moment. Today. Insider sources claim Starmer's speech was not improvised. It was crafted as a surgical strike on Putin's image, and, at the same time, a shield for British morale. He presented brutal accounts. A 12-year-old girl and a 6-month-old baby killed by Russian missiles targeting civilians in Kiev. Not bases, not military targets. A pharmacy and a power plant. The description was so vivid that, according to journalists present, even opponents in the chamber fell silent. Starmer spared no detail. He painted the picture of a regime that, in his words, uses winter as a weapon. And then came the psychological blow. He looked into the camera, the same one broadcasting to millions of Britons, and said, "We are not spectators." That line changed the country's mood, because, from that moment, the distance between the war out there and the crisis at home vanished. The public understood that the price of energy, the cost of food, the fear of tomorrow, all of it, somehow, was now part of a moral battle. And it is at this point that the narrative shifts completely. Because what Starmer did, according to backroom sources, was something no British leader has dared since the days of Thatcher. He turned the people's discomfort into a symbol of national resistance. "If we endure the cold, we endure for a purpose," he reportedly said in closed meetings. And strategists call this the Iron Winter, a dangerous gamble. Pain now, credibility later. But here is the dilemma. If the public gives up before Putin yields, the whole strategy collapses. And that is why, according to internal documents, the government has a massive communication plan to link every economic sacrifice to the defense of freedom. They know the public is tired, that inflation is eroding the national mood, and that even conservative MPs whisper about unsustainable moral support. That is why today's speech was the turning point. It was not just a foreign policy statement, it was an attempt to reprogram the national spirit. But such an operation carries risks, and the first sign came from an unexpected quarter. British intelligence itself. Leaked reports from sources linked to MI6 warn that Moscow may be preparing a new kind of retaliation, not with tanks, but with code. Cyber attacks on critical infrastructure, disinformation campaigns to divide public opinion and manipulate local elections, and even economic sabotage disguised as market failures. "We are entering the era of total hybrid warfare," said a former defense official anonymously. "There are no longer any boundaries between diplomacy and confrontation." And this explains the tension behind the scenes. Starmer's speech may have triggered a new escalation, in which London becomes a direct target of Russian vengeance. According to NATO sources, there are signs of Russian digital activity on British servers since last night. Nothing officially confirmed, but alarms are flashing red. What began as a moral statement now seems to have ignited a global strategic dispute. Meanwhile, within the UK, the opposition is divided between those who call Starmer a visionary and those who accuse him of playing with fire in a European powder keg. But the blind spot for most of the media is this: the UK is no longer just supporting Ukraine. It is taking the moral and operational lead for the entire Western Front. Starmer's speech was the public seal of a backroom shift. London has stopped following Washington and started leading. According to diplomats, Downing Street pushed for new sanctions directly targeting financial networks linked to the Kremlin, freezing assets of oligarchs and British companies with suspicious connections in tax havens. There are rumors that even luxury properties in Kensington and Chelsea could be targeted. This is unprecedented, but it is also dangerous, because touching the Russian elite is touching the economic foundations that have comfortably coexisted with British capital for decades. And that is where things get explosive. According to analysts, there is real fear of financial retaliation, a wave of digital attacks capable of crippling banks and stock exchanges. The UK is betting its own stability for a moral victory, and in today's world, that is almost geopolitical heresy. And if you want to follow every new twist in this story, because, believe me, this is only the beginning, stop for a second and listen. If you want to understand what is really at stake and receive the next bombshells firsthand, subscribe now and like this. It shows you are on the side of unfiltered information and helps me bring you new data and behind-the-scenes insights as soon as they emerge. What is happening between London, Moscow, and Brussels changes every hour, and the next 48 hours could redefine the balance of power in Europe. No mainstream channel will tell you clearly what I am about to reveal: the behind-the-scenes links between politics, energy, and power. The story that began with a speech could end with something far more serious: an internal division that threatens to split the UK itself. So, if you want to understand the scale of what is coming, subscribe and stay until the end, because now is when the game changes. Sources within Parliament say there is silent panic among ministers in Starmer's own Labour Party. No one expected the Prime Minister's tone to be so incendiary. Some MPs, according to the Daily Express, reportedly said off the record that the UK cannot afford a moral crusade while families freeze at home. But the Prime Minister seems to have calculated exactly this reaction. He wants the contrast. He wants the narrative of courage versus comfort. The strong resist, the weak retreat. And this resonates strongly with a British base that still carries the myth of the wartime spirit, of keep calm and carry on. The strategy is risky but powerful: to turn every cold hearth, every high energy bill, into a symbolic reminder that freedom has a price. The people endured the Blitz, say Starmer's allies. They will endure the winter. Only this time, the enemy is not dropping bombs, but manipulating markets and opinions. And this invisible war is eating the country from within. And it is precisely at this point that the Kremlin is betting, not on the strength of its missiles, but on the weakness of democracies. According to intelligence experts, Putin understands that he does not need to win militarily. He just needs to survive politically. The real goal is fatigue. A slow, almost imperceptible fatigue that turns outrage into apathy and conviction into doubt. Every bill increase, every strike, every recession headline is a piece on this chessboard. Moscow is betting that the UK and the West will crumble from within, not from bombs, but from despair. And Starmer knows this. That is why he risked a speech that, to many, sounds suicidal. He wants to provoke a national awakening before exhaustion becomes irreversible. Because, according to reports circulating among advisors, there are signs of moral fatigue across the continent. The same people who a year ago demanded firmness now ask why. And this shift in tone could decide the future, not only of Ukraine, but of Britain's own credibility. Meanwhile, the rest of Europe watches in tense silence. Poland and the Baltic states applaud the British stance. They say that finally, someone had the courage to name Putin and make clear the cost of complacency. But in Berlin and Paris, the tone is different. According to diplomatic sources, Emmanuel Macron considered the statements reckless, and Olaf Scholz called for strategic restraint. Translated, fear. Fear that British firmness will drag the continent into an escalation no one wants to pay for. In the back rooms of the EU, it is said that London is trying to reclaim the prestige lost post-Brexit, projecting moral strength where it has lost economic power. But this maneuver could backfire, because if the UK leads and fails, it will be blamed for a new European division. If it leads and wins, it rewrites the rules of the game. And that is what is at stake, not just Ukraine, but the UK's role in the post-globalist world, a world where sovereignty and sacrifice are once again synonymous. But the battlefield is not only international. Within its borders, a different war is beginning to boil. The people against the political elite. On the streets of Manchester, Leeds, and Birmingham, discontent grows over prices, and the feeling that the government talks of freedom, while ordinary citizens foot the bill. According to a Telegraph poll, over 60% of Britons believe the country is being used in a war that is not ours. It is exactly this perception that the Kremlin seeks to fuel, and that Starmer must contain before it turns into revolt. The problem is that the Prime Minister's message demands faith. Faith that sacrifice has purpose. Faith that enduring the cold is resisting tyranny. And faith, as history shows, is the first thing to vanish when people feel hunger and fear. The opposition knows this. Conservatives and populists already exploit this narrative. They talk of Kyiv, but forget London. The question is, how long can the country endure this duel between morality and survival? Behind the scenes, strategists warn that the country is reaching a breaking point emotionally. According to sources close to the cabinet, internal polls show that the dominant feeling among Britons is not anger. It is exhaustion. And that is what worries Downing Street. When people tire, they do not protest. They simply switch off. The greatest enemy now is not Putin, nor the cold, nor the price of gas. It is indifference. That is why Starmer is trying to reignite a forgotten kind of patriotism, the patriotism of moral resistance. He speaks of sacrifice for truth, pain with purpose, suffering that forges character. It is a discourse that echoes the decades when Britain saw itself as a bulwark against tyranny. But times have changed. Today, This rhetoric must compete with distractions, with distrust, with the cynicism that corrodes even just causes. And it is here that the real battle takes place. Not in the trenches of Ukraine, but in British living rooms, facing a silent decision, to believe or to give up. And as this invisible struggle unfolds, the political clock ticks. Winter approaches, energy bills rise, and national patience wears thin. According to market reports, companies are already warning of cuts, and stock markets fluctuate at the slightest rumor from Moscow. With each new day of uncertainty, the UK pays a price: financial, moral, psychological. But Starmer bets that this pain is temporary, and that, when history is written, London will be remembered as the capital that did not bow. He knows, however, that if he fails, the effect will be devastating. The country that inspired the world to resist during the Blitz could find itself divided between idealism and pragmatism, between duty and despair. And in the midst of this, the British people bear the burden of a historic decision: to stand firm for freedom or to seek the comfort of a fragile peace bought with silence. So, when we look back at this moment, we may realize that it was not just a speech in Westminster. It was the beginning of a new era of courage or collapse. Starmer has rolled the dice, and now history will demand its price. If the UK resists, it will prove that democracy can still be firm, even under cold, fear, and doubt. But if it yields, the message to the world will be devastating: that freedom is only worth it when it is convenient. And that is what makes it all so urgent. Because the real battlefield is not in Ukraine or Moscow. It is here, in our daily choices, in the ability to endure pain and still believe in something greater than our own comfort. So, I ask you, when winter comes and the bills weigh heavy, will you give up, or will you hold firm for what you believe is right? Because, in the end, this is how empires fall, or survive.